Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at Dynamite as a whole, which is kind of an odd weapon. It's an early game weapon, and it has been requested, but I didn't know exactly how to combine it with stuff. So we're going to be talking about Dynamite, long fuse Dynamite, and the two versions of the time bombs, the regular time bomb and the high yield time bomb, because those are also Dynamite-like implements. So Dynamite is probably going to be one of the very first explosives that you get your hands on in Fallout, if not your very first explosive that you get your hands on. You could potentially start out with the mercenary grenade rifle, and then you already have 40mm grenades. You can also find like powder charges laying around the wasteland near good springs. You can potentially find things like frag grenades early on too. So those might come actually a little bit sooner than the regular Dynamite. However, you're going to find a lot of this on powder gangers in the early game because a lot of them carry around sticks of dynamite or long fuse dynamite. It's also pretty common to be found in their camps and in boxes nearby. So, for the base stats of Dynamite, this one requires 0 explosives and only 1 strength to wield, so literally any character will be proficient with Dynamite right at the very start of the game, no matter how you're building. This does 1 damage plus 75 damage. The 1 damage is from an actual impact from the grenade, or from the Dynamite in this case, so if you physically throw the Dynamite at something and hit it, then you will deal 1 damage to that enemy. The explosion deals 75 damage. This can be scaled up with perks, and we'll talk about that when we get to the pros and cons and other perks that kind of affect this. This has 31 damage per second. Damage per second with explosives is a little bit weird to calculate because usually it's multiple explosives going off, so it can actually be higher than this, and this can hit multiple enemies because this is an explosive. This one has 0 crit damage on it whatsoever, so crit chance does not matter. Crits in general do not matter for explosive weapons. Most explosive weapons have extremely low crit chance or no crit chance, or sometimes no crit damage, so even if you do have a crit chance, it doesn't matter if you hit it because you're not actually getting any extra damage, which is fine. If you're going with a full explosives build, you probably already know about this, and you probably won't go with very much luck to begin with, because it really doesn't help your build like it can with other builds. Basically with every other type of build. This costs 24 action points to use in VATS, which is pretty good. Most explosives, at least thrown explosives and placed explosives, don't require that much VATS use. Although I wouldn't really recommend that you use the placed explosives in VATS. It's better to be using like the thrown ones in VATS. And even then, it can be a little bit awkward to use them. It is kind of nice that you just need to get close because you don't need to hit something directly with an explosive. And the Dynamite have a 3-second fuse on them. So once you light them and throw it, then it has 3 seconds before it goes off. Unless the Dynamite itself is hit with another projectile, like it's shot with a shotgun or something, then it can go off instantly. Let's talk about the long fuse Dynamite next, and then we'll go over the pros and cons, because these ones only vary a little bit, where they have the exact same stat lines as one another. The only difference is the fuse time, where a regular stick of dynamite will have a 3-second fuse and the long fuse will have 6 seconds. 6 seconds is kind of a long time to wait for this to actually go off, and that can be a little bit annoying. I don't really like the long fuse dynamite for actual use. I usually just sell them for money. But regular Dynamite has a short enough fuse for it to be pretty useful, especially into the early game. Let's talk about the pros and cons of Dynamite and the long fuse Dynamite. For the general pros, this is extremely cheap. It's very easy to buy Dynamite or find Dynamite on enemies. It's also very easy to find Dynamite around. Dynamite also works as a crafting resource for different explosives, which can be pretty nice. One of those being like the time bombs and the powder charges, which can be okay as well. We'll talk about at least the time bombs in a second. It comes with the basic advantages that explosives have, where you can deal with crowds of enemies. Works really well against slow crowds of enemies. Faster enemies, this can be a little bit harder to actually use. For the downsides of Dynamite, this doesn't do that much damage or damage per second compared to other explosives. It can still deal decent damage to the later game, and crippling the limbs like most explosive does is still really good. So if you're just using it for that and you're kind of afraid of blowing yourself up, then Dynamite's actually a pretty decent option. It does have a weird throw pattern and bouncing pattern, so this one just takes getting used to, as well as sometimes you're just going to have to accept that your Dynamite's going to bounce off and do nothing at times. That's just kind of a downside of explosives, but Dynamite in particular has kind of an erratic bounce pattern. And then at least for the long fuse Dynamite, the long fuse does really suck. I do not like having a 6-second fuse. A 3-second fuse is much better, and it feels pretty good for you to still be able to use this effectively in combat against most enemies. The 6-second fuse makes it so any enemy that's even reasonably fast can run right up on top of you, so it makes it really, really awkward for fighting a lot of the different animals. Oh, and interestingly enough, both these are included as holdout weapons, so if you want to sneak Dynamite into somewhere, you absolutely can if you would like. There are some perks that we should probably talk about with the explosives as well. With Dynamite specifically, it is affected by the Cowboy perk. However, the time bombs that we're going to be talking about in a little bit are not affected by it, even though they're made of Dynamite, which is a little bit strange. Either way, Cowboy gets you 25% more damage with Dynamite, so that one's really nice. You can take Demo Expert, which will get you 20% damage per rank which is really good for basically every explosive weapon, and you want to have it on an explosives build. Splash damage can also be pretty nice with these, as it increases your AoE radius. Hit the deck can also be really good for an explosives build in general, and even if you're not going with an explosives build, you're just afraid of explosives, makes it so you take less damage from all explosions. And if you're going to be playing with an explosives build, you're probably going to be crippling your limbs a decent amount and sometimes blowing yourself up, because explosives are rather dangerous just to the user of it. Dynamite is also affected by the Heave Ho perk, and so are other explosives. Heave Ho makes it so that you can throw explosives and melee weapons further. However, it does count towards like the grenade rifles too, where it can actually shoot them further, which is pretty cool. So if you're going with an explosives build, Heave Ho could be another really good option for your build. As for an overall ranking for Dynamite and the long fuse Dynamite, I would put regular Dynamite up into D tier on our tier list. It's by no means a great explosive, but it will serve you pretty well into the early game. You're probably going to switch this out for frag grenades as it goes on if you want to throw an explosive, and you're probably going to switch it out for other explosive weapons like grenade rifles once you go further into the game. As for long fuse Dynamite, I would put this into F tier. Personally, I do not like the long fuse Dynamite. It takes too long to go off. If you're just going to sell it though, it's worth a decent amount, so that's pretty cool. I'll always pick it up, but I will rarely use it. Let's move on to time bombs and kind of go over them as a whole too. Time bombs can be made. You can find regular time bombs in chests as well, although it's going to be easiest if you make these on a workbench. You can make these on a workbench using 1 duct tape, 5 dynamite, 1 egg timer, and 1 scrap electronic. All of those are very easy to find in the early game. They're really easy to find at any time, so making time bombs is not particularly difficult. Time bombs are a little bit of an awkward one to use though, because they are not used as a landmine where they have a sensor that goes off when enemies walk near them. They are set to a timer. These ones require 50 explosives and 1 strength. This deals 50 damage per second, although damage per second on time bombs is very odd, because you're gonna have to wait 15 seconds because that's how long the fuse is for these. So damage per second is not really an accurate term for this. This has 0 crit damage as well. This costs 24 action points to throw, the same as Dynamite, although again you don't want to be using this inside of vats. It's going to be really difficult to use this, so that barely matters. And time bombs weigh half a weight. With the 15-second fuse on this, it makes time bombs used in a practical sense against regular enemies that are running around really hard to do unless the enemies are extremely slow. If there's something like centaurs, you can definitely get away with it because they move incredibly slow and the time bombs can be used to blow them up. You can also kind of cheese with these by tossing them down, moving so far away, and then shooting the explosive to then have it set off. This will set it off instantly. It's going to be easiest to do this with something like a shotgun or another explosive weapon like a grenade rifle, and that would be the way that I would kind of recommend using them. You can also reverse pickpocket these into enemies' inventory, and then they will be armed, and they can be really useful in that way because then you have 15 seconds to run around or run away from that enemy before they explode, so that can be really nice. They can also be used in the vault quest where you have to blow up the vault too, since that can be really dangerous unless you have time bombs or C4, in which case then it's going to be the easiest to do, and a 15-second fuse gives you plenty of time to actually leave that area safely. Let's talk about the high yield bomb as well before we go into the pros and cons. You can make this on workbenches as well, so long as you have the Mad Bomber perk, which allows you to craft other explosives, and this takes all the same things except for 1 more dynamite, so it takes 6 dynamite rather than 5 dynamite to make the high yield time bomb. And this one is basically identical to the regular time bomb, it just has more damage. Where the regular time bomb has 1 damage plus 150 damage, this one has 1 damage plus 400 damage. So it gives you a substantial amount more damage. However, it still has a 15-second fuse time, and other than that, its stats are the same. For the general pros of time bombs, they can be useful because they can deal a lot of damage, and the reverse pickpocketing can be really good. And that's kind of their only real strength. The downsides to these are the 15-second fuse takes forever. If you're trying to use this in a practical sense, it's rarely going to work, and it's very easy to blow yourself up with these because you're probably going to be chucking down multiple, and the explosion radius can be pretty big. They also just usually aren't worth the dynamite cost to use them. I would rather have 6 sticks of dynamite than 1 high yield time bomb most of the time. For higher level enemies and for certain areas, then I could see myself using them to make time bombs in order to, well, basically sneak them in, put it down, and then have something come near it so that I could blow it up. But even so, it's really difficult to recommend the time bombs overall when there is things like landmines that are just going to be more useful and way more consistent than this. They're also going to be a whole lot less dangerous to you than the time bombs are, so I really wouldn't recommend using time bombs most of the time, and for that I would put them into the F tier on our tier list, because I don't really like them outside of just using them as like reverse pickpocket bombs, which, I mean, honestly is really funny, but not always the most practical, and you don't get to do that very often in the game. So would I recommend Dynamite and the time bombs? Dynamite, yeah, at least into the early game. Later on, you're probably going to replace it with frag grenades or other explosives. Time bombs, no, I wouldn't really recommend them. I don't think it's worth the resources. You can probably spend those resources better on other explosives that you can make at the workbench too. I would just prefer going with that over the other explosives. I mean, you can make powder charges with these, or tin grenades thanks to Mad Bomber as well, which would be better options than something like the time bombs that use very similar resources to them. So tell me your thoughts on Dynamite and the time bombs down in the comments below. How do you enjoy using them? Do you enjoy using them? And what weapon would you like to see next? Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye bye everyone!